welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Thursday, December 12th, excuse me. And it's also a great pleasure to be joined by three distinguished gentlemen here from around the county, believe it or not. And we're really happy to have with us today Jonah Spivak, who is a member of the State 250th Anniversary Commemoration Commission, and also the Regional Bennington 250th Anniversary Committee. John Mathewson is the curator at the Dorset Historical Society, and Sean Harrington is the curator at the Manchester Historical Society. And as you may have already guessed, our topic today is the upcoming 250th commemoration of the start of the American Revolution, which a lot of those important events took place right here. We're going to learn more about what's going to be in the works for the plans for next spring, starting next April and May. But it's also a 3-year-long event from 2025 to 2027 to commemorate, okay, I know I'm going to blow this, the bi-sesquicentennial or 250th anniversary of those important events. I guess the
You know, I had not heard that version.
Semi-quincentennial is also a way to go.
I've heard that more frequently.
That's the one we've been using, but apparently there is another term, bi-sesquicentennial. That's really
There's another one as well.
Isn't it?
Bicentennial. That's another way of doing it. Say that 3 times fast.
You know, my preference is it's the 250th anniversary.
It's 250, right?
Vermont 250.
250th.
250 years ago, you know, or at least next spring, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys made a march up through Bennington County on their way to Fort Ticonderoga. Those of you who are the history nerds out there in the audience already know that their objective there was to get some of the large cannon that was in place up at Fort Ticonderoga to help out the colonists who were already engaged with British forces around the Boston area, Lexington and Concord. You know, some of that ordnance up there was going to come in handy in the eventual siege of Boston that was going to start that year and begin the chain of events that led to the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolutionary War and our founding of our country. So like I said, this is going to be a 3-year-long process. So we're going to be kind of focused a bit on the Fort Ticonderoga and Green Mountain Boys activities there next year. But then we'll also be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. And the Battle of Bennington, which took place in 1777, will also be a focus in 2027. So with that said, Jonah, let me turn to you and have you get us started here. Can you give us the big picture overview of what's going to be happening here on the local level?
Yeah, sure, it'd be my pleasure, but I'm going to add one piece to 2027. You already, of course, mentioned the Battle of Bennington, something near and dear to all our hearts, but significantly, that is the year that the Vermont Republic was finally established, an independent republic for 14 years, and something really unique about our state and our contribution. So in addition to being part of the Revolutionary War, you could argue that we were America's first ally in the Revolutionary War because we were in fact an independent country. So, but that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. So much to cover. You mentioned that our kickoff is in 2025. That's the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution. When? At Lexington and Concord. You may recall the phrase, the shot heard round the world. That is in reference to that event. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yep.
And then it was because of that, the realization that more would be needed. The ordnance from those forts at Ticonderoga would be needed. And we had had a little hint of that, right? Wasn't there John Brown who had already done some exploration up along the Champlain Valley to Canada, sort of scouting that out? That's probably getting a little too far into the weeds. But suffice to say that almost immediately after the Revolutionary War started on April 19th, we saw the need for an expedition to Fort Ticonderoga. So our planning locally is to weave in this history with events and happenings in our region so people can be involved, and so students and schools can also include this as part of the learning experience for kids. There's a lot of power behind the sense of place that kids have when they know about the histories where they live. So I'm really excited about that. So in April, sometime in April, perhaps on April 19th, we're going to be doing a debate, a 250th debate amongst high school debate teams. Teams from Mount Anthony, Arlington High School, and Burn have already committed, and we also have outreach to Cambridge and Hoosick Falls and Long Trail School to see if they'd be interested in fielding teams as well. Why? The question, what is the question on the table? Literally, should these colonies remain as part of Great Britain, England, or should they be independent?
Now, you know, Jonah, you raise an interesting point. I was going to see if we could talk about it a little bit later, but this is the perfect time, I think. It's fascinating to me, as I've been doing some of my own research on this, how divided the country was, or what became the country.
Yeah.
There was a real 50-50 split, I'd say, between folks who identified as patriots or whatever, or wanted to see independence, and those who wanted to remain loyal to Great Britain. I don't think you usually hear that part of it that much back in high school history class. So.
It's a good point. There's also elements of it being a civil war as well as a revolutionary war. This was brother and brother, family against family as well. Lots of examples of that throughout our region. So lots of topics to suss out as part of that, absolutely. And I just love the idea of engaging our students from around the region to have literally that conversation, perhaps on the day when the Revolutionary War started or around then. Either way, it's a great introduction for everyone in the region and the community to start thinking about this auspicious year. And by the way, yes, everyone's talking about 2026 as the 250th, whether it's the bicentennial or the semi-quincentennial or the 250th or whatever you want to call it. But for us, it was really important that we started in 25 because that is the big moment for our region. So we talk about the revolution has started, we're going to have this debate, but then in May, what happens?
Right, what's interesting,
I just wanted to step on Jonah's toes
By all means.
and disagree with something.
Oh, wonderful.
He said that everything starting in 2025, things started in 2021.
Yeah.
With the Breckenridge Affair,
Thank you.
250th of the Breckenridge Affair in in Bennington. Yeah. There was a great reenactment of that, a great event during the height of COVID, but it was outdoors and
then
people were wearing masks. And then the Arlington,
yes.
the Remember Baker Affair, that had a great turnout.
Absolutely.
A local bakery provided some baked treats. They called themselves for that day the Remember Bakery. The arrest of Remember Baker, a cousin of Ethan Allen's, and then his forcible release by the newly formed Green Mountain Boys. So things have already been going on.
Yeah.
And we're just continuing that because there was so much other than just a bunch of guys in Philadelphia signing a document.
And it didn't appear out of nowhere. You're absolutely right.
Right.
There's a long history leading up to it. Vermont is in that unique situation of having been claimed by both New Hampshire and New York. So those formative years of just figuring that out.
Yes, exactly.
and that time also gave rise to the fact that we call them the Green Mountain Boys, but they were essentially a militia. And by the time the hostilities actually broke out, the Green Mountain Boys were probably one of the best formed militias in the colonies, you know, who had actually been, you know, at the front lines, well, fighting with their neighbors, but still were an organized, you know, I mean, they were there, they were ready to go. I mean, they were turnkey. And, you know, when you say the shot, when you say shot heard around the world, you know, I was talking to my kids about this who were high school age, and we say shot heard around the world, but the fact of the matter is it was a shot heard locally, but they didn't even know about it in Ticonderoga, which is why Alan had a leg up.
Yeah.
So Alan knew about it, and the whole idea of moving as quickly and as quietly as they could, because they didn't want Ticonderoga to find out that this had actually happened, and that there were hostilities, because then they would have reinforced, and nor did the British forces up north in Canada. They didn't know either, because news did not travel like today, where something happens in, let's say, the Middle East, and we know almost instantaneously by looking at our phones.
If only they had had social media back then.
They would have known.
Yeah.
You could have posted it on X.
One great thing to remember is how quickly these things happened. In March of '75, you had the Westminster Massacre here in Vermont, or the New Hampshire Grants. The next month, you have Lexington and Concord. Just a few weeks later, you have Ticonderoga. And then in June, you have the creation of the Continental Army. And in July, you have the first of the Dorset Conventions to determine what do we do about this place between New York and New Hampshire. So things were going very quickly.
Right.
one
Yeah.
after another.
And our events are really designed to mirror these historical significant events as they come along. So for example, in May, the very beginning of May, May 1st through 4th, is our first regional multi-town event. And that covers that moment when Edward Mott from Connecticut and Benedict Arnold from Boston basically converge on Bennington. And in Bennington, they hire, although he knew it was coming, so it wasn't a surprise, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys agreed to take the lead on this expedition to capture Fort Ticonderoga, which, as you say, was unawares because they still did not realize that the fighting had broken out. Yeah. So what we're planning to do is we're going to use May 1st and 2nd in the South Shire as sort of an educational day. We'll be bringing students from all the 4th grade classrooms throughout the region in southwestern Vermont and nearby New York are invited as well to come to Old Bennington, where we'll be doing 2-hour programs with all those students to tell them about this story of the capture of Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys and the expedition to capture Fort Ticonderoga. So that'll be happening on Thursday and Friday. On Friday, we'll also be having a tour for the regular public. So if you're not in 4th grade, don't worry. You can have an opportunity to visit these historic sites and hear this story yourself.
Oh, great, because I'm not in the 4th grade anymore.
Oh, well, that's a
So
relief.
I'm glad I can still attend.
We would not want to exclude you, so you'll be able to
Thank you.
have that experience.
And Sean, you can go as well, right?
I mean, you know, the maturity level, I guess you could say 4th grader sometimes.
Well, we won't go there.
The
We're
Bennington
all in
Battle
trouble
Monument.
now.
The monument will be open early. They usually don't open until Memorial Day weekend, but they will be opening that weekend for those 4 days for this program. So then after that Thursday, Friday educational thing, and it's time to sort of marry up with the schools. That's why it's during the week. It'll happen during school hours, and then of course that public tour in the afternoon. But then on Saturday is the start of a weekend-long historical extravaganza throughout the region. And I'll talk a little bit about the South Shire and then pass it to you guys.
Sure.
But on Saturday, it'll start in Pownell, Vermont. It'll start with a reenactment of Edward Mott coming to Pownell and recruiting the very first 2 Green Mountain Boys to the effort. And then from there, there will be events held both at the Galusha House in Shasbury as well as other historical sites. Galusha House will kind of be the focal point in terms of having reenactors there. There'll be a mock tactical battle of some sort going on. There will be historical tables. There will be demonstrations of 18th century cooking, 18th century medicine, as well as life of the commoner, as well as life of the militia person at that time. And one of the things we'll be producing is a passport book, which people can use from their start on Friday or Saturday. As they visit these various historical locations, they can get a stamp in their book. And then at the end of the weekend, you could submit that to win a fabulous prize, something historical related. We have not determined that yet, but it will be fabulous.
It will.
But it does not end on Saturday. It continues on, sort of following along that idea of this expedition, this march to Ticonderoga by Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, marking their route through our region. And then it culminates on Sunday, or at least our portion of it culminates. Please.
Good.
Well, that's one of the beauties is, you know, this is going to be an ongoing discussion because we're actually getting together working on all the details. As they come up through, when they get to Manchester, actually in Dellwood Cemetery is actually the final resting place of at least 2 of the Roberts family, General Christopher Roberts and his father John. And Christopher was actually the 3rd man into Ticonderoga. And depending on which account you read, you know, helped lead the expedition. It was John and his 4 sons, and Christopher being one of them. And so the fact that we actually have a couple of those bona fide Green Mountain Boys, you know, lying within Manchester limits, and that's where they lived at the time. Yeah. You know, we're going to have something there, and hopefully have a couple of reenactors. I'm in touch with the Vermont Sons of the American Revolution, which I'm a card-carrying member of, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of them down here to help commemorate. The Equinox Resort has been a great partner. We had our gala there, which was a smashing success, I must say. And they've agreed to provide facilities to do something up if we, from Dellwood to go up to the Green. Paige over at the Manchester Community Library. She's very anxious of what the library can do. So not only is it going to be just a commemoration of what it was like then, it's also going to be a great way for all of us to collaborate and bring back that sense of community, which sometimes has kind of slipped through the fingers of our society today. You know, where all the towns work together, we tend to be a little tribal, and this is going to be a good way for us all to kind of work together. I mean, even Manchester and Dorset are going to work together.
So tell us about
I'm sorry,
Dorset.
who are you? Yeah, that's with all the planning and organizing for the 250th. For me, that's been one of the great things is
The collaboration.
collaborating, getting to know people from the Pownell Historical Society, the Shaftesbury Historical Society, and on and on. I've even had conversations with people from Lexington and Concord, sharing ideas. And that broader view of the region has been really helpful to me.
You know, and gosh, Dorset is kind of a rock star in this story. It comes up again and again and again in terms of this early history of Vermont. So it's a kind of a quieter town right now, but it was really at the forefront of these stories at the time.
Well, there were several conventions that took place in Dorset, John. I think the first one was, July of 1775?
July 27th, 1775.
Fill us in, what happened at those?
Okay, there are 4 Dorset conventions, one in 1775, 3 in 1776, where people from the various towns of the New Hampshire grants,
Not yet Vermont.
right, the area between New York and New Hampshire that was being fought over by both of those colonies, came together to say, look, New York is claiming us, we don't want to be part of New York. And they had a lot of good reasons, don't get me started, I'll be here all day.
That's another whole program.
And they had paid basically New Hampshire proprietors for their farmland. And so they preferred New Hampshire over New York. But anyway, big, huge mess. And so they got together to talk about how to solve these problems. And they got together peacefully. I mean, everything else we were talking about pretty much has to do with force of arms. This was peaceful negotiation and talking things out. And at the first Dorset Convention, they had 2 major questions. First of all, when they had invaded Ticonderoga, they were not legally allowed any of the spoils of war or any pensions because they were not recognized by any government. And so they met to see if they would seek recognition from the Continental Congress. And also they had this rabble-rouser who claimed to be the leader of the Green Mountain Boys, and they didn't want him to be the leader anymore. His name was Ethan
Claimed?
Allen. So they voted him out of leadership and gave that leadership role to Seth Warner.
Who was a cousin, right, of Ethan Allen?
They were all related. But yes,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
what it seems like anyway, yeah.
and Seth Warner is mostly remembered today for the Seth Warner Memorial Highway, which is Route 30 from Manchester to Middlebury. And that freed up Ethan Allen also, so he could go be a rabble-rouser. And a few months later, he was trying to liberate Montreal.
All right, he went off to Canada and got captured.
He got captured and was
Spent the
in
next
jail
couple
for a
of
few
years
years.
on a prison boat
Yeah.
or something.
But it was before that Seth Warner was named at the first of the Dorset Conventions.
Well, there's also going to be like a bike tour or running
so
walk.
we want to include
to get back to May of
Absolutely.
2025.
May 1st through 4th of 2025. The goal is to include as many people as possible. And we get that, maybe history isn't the most exciting, interesting thing for you, at least right now. The more you learn, the more excited you will be. So we want to allow other ways for folks to participate. And we want to do that by encouraging people to bike or run the routes that the Green Mountain Boys took through our region. So we've reached out to running groups and we've reached out to biking groups to get them involved in having their members participate that way. So you could jog, run, walk, or ride the routes that Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys took. And I say routes because they didn't take just one path. They were trying to be sneaky, as Sean was saying earlier. So they took multiple routes, which is actually really nice because it allows these running groups and biking groups to pick secondary roads and safer routes that are perhaps more picturesque, and yet still has this historical connection of this expedition towards Ticonderoga. So look for more on that. So if you're a runner or a biker, these are all ways that you can do what you love to do anyway and stop at these various passport locations. We'll be having setups there to provide water or other help for people that are running or biking the route. And of course, you can get that stamp on your passport and be entered to win that fabulous prize at the end. But again, it's another way to experience history that broadens it just being, just listening to a lecture, for example, or four guys sitting around a table chatting. So.
But it mainly, wasn't it mainly like Route 7 or Route 7A that they took? I mean, that was my understanding anyway. I mean,
7A was a primary route, absolutely. But Dorset.
From Bennington to Manchester.
Yep.
Right, but then the Dorset, is it Dorset West Road? Or?
Manchester West Road to Dorset West
Yeah,
Road.
Manchester West Road to Dorset West
That
Road.
was a key important route as well, in part because there's a significant location there.
That's where the Cephas Kent Tavern was, on the West Road at the end of Nicholas Hill Road. The building's not there anymore. It was a log cabin, about 20 by 30, very cramped quarters for the meetings. But yeah, that's where that was.
And that was the location of the first Dorset Convention, which we will be honoring this coming
There
year.
will be a commemoration there. I know that the Colonial Dames are hoping to do a cleaning of the marble monument that they placed there back in 1912.
Nice.
Which has a whole different history of its own.
Rewritten or replaqued a couple times.
And it's been moved 3
And
times.
moved, yeah.
Yeah. It was placed in the middle of the road, then to the side of the road, then the other side of the road.
And ironically, the house that it sits in front of was owned by Abraham Lincoln's great-great-grandson.
Lincoln
for a
Isham.
while. Yeah, Lincoln
Yes.
Isham.
Yep.
Just as a little
Did not-
aside.
The things you learn, amazing.
And if you want to go back further, it was owned by Zéphine Humphrey and Wallace Fahnestock. Not Revolutionary
Dorset.
War figures, but Zéphine was a well-known best-selling author from Dorset.
so following that big weekend then the first weekend in May, will there be any more? I mean, there'll be perhaps the anniversary of the Dorset Convention there in July, but will the next big round of events then be happening the following year in 2026 as part of the 250th commemoration of the Declaration of Independence, and then the following year after that, the Battle of Bennington? Is there going to be stuff in between, or?
There will be, of course, the Battle of Bennington is the longest running, continuously celebrated battle of the American Revolution, and that will happen every year leading up to our signature anniversary year in 2027. But we'll also be celebrating and honoring the 250th anniversary of the creation of the U.S. Army. That's on June 14th of 2025. And then, of course, the Dorset Convention in July. We mentioned the Battle of Bennington in August. That takes care of 2025. That's our first kickoff year. In 2026, our main focus will be around the Declaration of Independence along with the rest of the country, but that's not all.
Well, there were 3 Dorset conventions that year, and they do tie in with the Declaration of Independence. At the second Dorset Convention in January of '76, they voted to send Heman Allen to Philadelphia to say, hey, are we part of New Hampshire or are we
not.
part of New York? And he gets there, and they've got other things on their mind. And so the next Dorset Convention was at the end of July 1776, where he comes back and said, they didn't have time for me. They were doing this declaration thing. And so they have to figure out what's the next step after that.
And this is important, though, because it's all part of the lead up. This is the genesis of the formation of this new republic, which is then our signature anniversary year in 2027. Starts right in January with the Westminster Declaration. Did I get that right?
Massacre.
No.
Oh.
The Westminster
In
Declaration.
77, yeah.
So it was like, it was Vermont's Declaration of Independence from everybody, from New York, from New Hampshire, and England. So, you know, it was kind of like a Declaration of Independence 2.0, but very specific to Vermont.
Yes.
And then the story continues, of course, in July with the Battle of Hubbardton on July 7th, I think. And then just a couple days later in Windsor, Vermont, that's Vermont voting in Vermont's Constitution, where I think we had actually changed the name to Vermont. It's worth mentioning that I think with the Declaration, we were considering calling ourselves
New Connecticut.
New Connecticut,
Yeah.
right. But by the time the Constitution rolled around, we had already decided that the name for this new independent republic would be Vermont, based on Vermont, green mountains, that French
Right.
phrase.
It's one of Alan's friends, I think, who coined it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was someone who obviously didn't know French very well. Because it's more like the Latin.
Yeah,
The
well
Bears
said.
Montes is
Yes.
the Latin.
Yeah. And then, of course, we finished that year with the Battle of Bennington, which is a state holiday for Vermont. I think we're the only one other state has a battle that is a state holiday. That's San Jacinto Day in Texas. So we're another thing that makes us unique.
I'm going to push you back on that.
Well, there's one more. There's the Lincoln expedition. Was that what you were going to mention?
No,
or-
I was going to mention Patriots Day in Massachusetts.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, please.
Patriots Day in Massachusetts commemorates Battle of Lexington Concord.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't have that in the name, but it is to commemorate those battles.
So before we wind things up, I should also mention that there's also a website, a state website, that gives a lot of information about all of this, which I have somewhere down here. Anniversary250.vermont.gov, fairly easy to find. A lot of information there, but one of the things that I found kind of interesting was that they see this as an opportunity for a lot of communities to learn about their own histories, even if they might not have been, like sort of on the march path that the Green Mountain Boys took to Fort Ticonderoga or any of these other events. That there were things going on as well, and there's grant opportunity as well. I think $1,000 for communities to, get some money to help them. You learn about what happened 250 years ago.
That is contingent on your town signing a resolution to support the 250th in Vermont, and I believe all of our towns.
Dorset still has to do it.
Oh my goodness! What?
Yeah, I know,
okay,
I know,
well,
I know.
so we're still waiting on Dorset, but many of our towns in our region, and our goal is to have all 17 towns and villages in Bennington County sign that resolution before the end of 2025. So if you're listening to this and your community has not yet done that, contact us on how to. In addition to that state website, there is a regional website. We're all members of the same regional Bennington 250th Anniversary Committee. That's Bennington250.org.
It's a great website.
Yeah,
Go there.
yeah. He wrote the intro.
I did.
You did.
I'll have to go back and read it. Hope I didn't say anything to embarrass myself.
That was a long time ago. One last final thought I just can't help but kind of throw this out there is that it's kind of really intriguing to me to think about, when we look back 250 or so years ago, to learn and remember and understand again about what happened, how it's a great way to inform the present. I mean, I guess that's really the whole point of history in the first place, right? We remember that such and such a thing happened at such and such a point. You think, well, why? And that everything is a link, right, to a long chain that takes us to today, and maybe in some way helps us understand, what's going on and why we do things the way we do.
I think a great point. And I think in many ways the whole promise of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is an unfinished promise. It's something we are still striving for, those ideals that we thought of 250 years ago, still striving to make them real. And I think one of the hopes for this commemoration is that we remember to shine a spotlight on some of those underrepresented stories as well that played a key role in who we are today and who we hope to become.
Right, and the compromise that went into doing that, because the fact that we're the 14th state and people say, well, the Bennington battlefield's not even in Bennington. Well, at the time it was actually part of it, but a part of the compromise of us becoming the 14th state was we ceded land back to New York and brought our state lines back, and we left it. I think they should have just annexed a little part of it, just to keep so that way we could keep a straight face.
Well, at one
Yes.
point, the dividing line was going to be like the Hudson River, right?
That's
Or-
correct,
Yeah.
during the Greater
Yeah.
Vermont period. That's right, well said. Yeah.
Wouldn't that have been interesting?
Can I mention one other thing before we leave?
Sure.
First of all, thank you for having us. This is wonderful
Yeah,
having
my
these
pleasure.
conversations. So much is going on. You might recognize that I'm wearing clothes that are a little out of fashion today. That's on purpose. As part of this effort, we are recruiting men and women to be part of our Green Mountain Boys reenactment group, which will be needed throughout these anniversary years. So if you're interested in history, you like the smell of black powder, please give us contact us using that Bennington250.org website, Bennington250.org.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there for today, but once again, I want to thank Sean Harrington, John Mathewson, and Jonas Mivak for being with us to fill us in on what's going to be, I think, an extremely exciting spring coming up next year. Like I say, even if you're not a history nerd, you can't help but be excited about this stuff. It's really interesting.
And wouldn't it be great to see Andrew with a brown vest, you know, big old musket?
Absolutely.
I knew you were going to say that.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
My
It's been
pleasure.
great.
Great. Thank you guys for making the time for this. Really good.
Oh, yeah.
And thanks to all of you who've been with us today and making the time for this conversation. Hope you found it interesting. And we'll see you again the next time. Take care.